How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Elier Gonzalez. Again, exploring now the user experience enhancements, which is part of the course taught by Kathy Gramman, a software engineer that she is currently working at Expo, and she previously worked at Formidable, which is a creative agency, as a director of engineering in mobile experience. But in today's video, we're gonna recap is at least how do we get here, right? To understand now first is what is the end goal of React Native, that at the end of the day is allow us to right now is user interface in mobile applications by having one single workflow or development using web technologies. So now React Native expose some of the common directive platform specific, right? So it focuses on core and functionality features that are widely used, or most of the time you're gonna use as your mobile applications. So for that, behind the scenes is used now a particular architecture. Previously or before before the versions 0.69, it used something called like a bridge, which is a way of how it now serialize or pass data from one thread to another thread, which is the thread that is relevant for now mounting all of your components. But now they now create this new rendering system called Fabric, which is pretty much like React for the web. So just to make a quick recap of React, which is this library that allows to write its user interface, all right? And now from version 16, where we can use now hooks, behind the scenes what it's doing is now using or behind the scenes, the way how React works is by now trigger when that state update change, which is something true for version 16, 17, 18, 19, and so on until right now. So trigger when the state updates, depend when this state update, depend when this state happens, whether it is on the initial render is going to now is call the create element during the rendering, all right, which is creating all of these different React elements DOM or DOM nodes elements, right? And then on the commit phase is going to mount that. In other words, it's going to append that to the DOM, so you can now see the screen on the initial render. However, if this happened during a re-render, so on the render phase, it's gonna detect which component actually update the state, and then now render that component. And if that component return other React component as well, it's gonna call it in a recursive way until there is no more React component, which is evaluating all of these React components. And as the component is evaluated, right? It also on the commit phase, because once the React DOM is evaluated at that particular re-render, right? There is something called the virtual DOM, which now check is a concept is a programming concept around the idea that have an ideal UI that you have an ideal representation of the UI, all right? So that you have now an ideal representation of the UI and kept that in memory, so you sync that with the real DOM. And this process is known as the reconciliation. That's the whole point of this virtual DOM. is that, hey, let's going to now have is a visual representation of the UI kept in memory and sync with the real DOM. And this synchronization process is known as the reconciliation, right? So React behind the scenes, it now has something called Fiber, which is this fancy data structure that allow you to keep track is all of these state updates and some of these performance optimizations. And behind the scenes is also allow you to do now this concurring batching, or something that when you work with synchronicity you are quite familiar with. And the idea here is that allow you to now is, with these new features, is give priority of when a particular set of elements needs to be rendered than another ones. So this is just one of the couple features that now the React team is aiming to, which is giving the ability to pause, start, and resume a render, and also is prioritize rendering. And this is something interesting as a way to understand now how React works, all right? And all the different phases that happens. And then when you want to now is communicate to the external world outside of the React components, you use now a hook. That this hook is being run or executed right after the commit phase. So the use effect and the use ref is rendered after as well the commit phase, similar to the use effect. There's some subtle difference between use ref and use effect, but the idea here is that on React Native we have is this rendering system called Fabric, that what it does is to render all of these elements and targeting and talking to directly this compiler platform specific native. So in other words, we can now is by using one of the common functionalities that React Native expose, for example, view, text input, like view, text input, scroll view, list, or flat list. So with that, among other features that it provides you, like touchable and touchable opacity, pressable, we can now is interact with this directive from the iOS or the Android or Windows platform. So Fabric, at the end of the day, the way how this works is by having is 3 phases. The first is the rendering, where it now create is the React element tree in JavaScript, which is now used to create the React shadow tree in C++. So now on the next phase, which is on the commit, it promotes the React element tree and the React shadow tree to be candidate or to be mounted, for candidate to be mounted on the device, as well as some layout information and calculation that it needs to be done. Once that is done, then on the mount phase is when it transforms the React shadow tree along with its calculations and mounted, transform that into a host view tree, and that is what is going to be mounted. So this pipeline happening at different threading models. So you have the UI threads, which is exclusively for manipulating is the host view elements, and then the JavaScript threads, which is when React JavaScript happens. For example, the React renderings and as well as the layout calculations. So why am I mentioning this? Because despite that this is something that allegedly you as a developer don't need to understand that, once you understand that, you now have at least a more broad perspective of how can we now write this kind of applications and what is going on behind the scenes. So how do we get here on the user experience enhancement is by actually exploring how can we set up the React Native using now Expo, which is React Native give you only the core functionality and APIs that you can now build as your UI, but the mobile hybrid developments requires other stuff as well. So for example is, hey, you need a routing and a navigation. Also you need a way to publish your app into the store, right? And all of this kind of stuff is provided by this framework, Expo, which is our certain requirement that you must follow to be a candidate for being a React Native framework. So Expo now provides this navigations, publishings, at least out of the box, as well as the icons and some styling guidelines. That's quite interesting. And well, we follow is how to set up this particularly React Native applications using Expo by first setting up the ESLinter, which is awesome, completely. So set up the ESLint, the prettier using TypeScript, and then creating our own or first view in React. Understand components from React Native like view and text, what is the subtle difference, how can we now define is the style for our components, and how now the layout work in the React Native. So it's using now the flex, which is something comes from the web, as a way to put now all of these elements that follow this formatting context, which is the layout, flex layout, right? And you can also work and manipulate with all of that kind of stuff. When you need to use some pixels or root elements or that kind of units, here now you are using is the device pixel, the device specific pixel ratio that is again change across different devices. So, for example, of font size, like font size, or the term is most of the time like font size, padding, margin, that kind of stuff. Then we also look at how can we now create text input, which is or the navigation first. So how can we now create our navigation and understand the different type of navigation that React Native application actually works or have as you build this, because on the web you have now specific navigation, right? You just define the route, then you go and navigate to that page. But here there are three types of navigation. You have the stack, the tabs, and the model. We also look at the subtle difference in between them, and then on the stack navigations, how can we use one of the preset or one of the components provided by, in this case, Expo router. How can we use now Expo router, and why we need to use that? Because React Native, as I mentioned before, doesn't provide you navigation out of the box. So locally for us, Expo, which is a wrapper around the React navigation, React Native navigations, it comes with a lot of things out of the box, which is quite useful, by the way, right? Which is quite useful, by the way. for example, it followed the same file-based navigation, pretty much like the yeah, pretty much like the how do you put it? Like Next.js, all right? What you have now that navigation follow is a file-based routing mechanism, to put it short. Also, we look at how can we create our own navigations following is that folder structure and the layout, and how you can define your routes as a way to navigate among them. And some of the animation that you can provide to your React Native apps, specifically the navigation, which is without it, it requires a lot of work. So in any case, so this is it, right? How you can build, how you can make this, which is great. And then I look now at the nested navigation, which is how you can actually put, for example, is a stack navigation instead of a tab navigation, okay? And then some of the common also stuff that we need to know, like the text input, scrolling, and the list, right? And how in the text input you actually is the way of how you can manage forms here, unlike the web, where you need to define as a form. Here on React Native, you just only use a text input for that, and then you manage that. On the scroll, if you want to render a fixed list of elements, you might want to use a scroll view for that, right? But this is quite interesting because unlike the normal flow, or unlike the web, where anytime we add some elements, the browser behind the scenes is going to detect if these elements overflow and then provide you the scrolling mechanism. Here, we don't have this is something that is exclusively for React Native. So we have now the scroll view. Again, if you have a finite or a fixed set of options that of course are overlapping, or that overflow of the visible area. And then we look now at what happened if you have now a huge data set that you want to show here from the server, okay? And you don't want it to block the main thread or cause some bottleneck issues. Well, this is when we use now flat lists or section lists. First, we look at the flat list, which is a specialized class from the virtualized list, where the idea is that it keeps track of all the visible elements in this area. It keeps track all the elements in a visible area, and elements way off that. Okay. So it keeps track of the visible elements. So it keeps track of elements in the visible area, and elements way off that doesn't get rendered, right? So you can also mount elements as you scroll here. So we also look at what is doing behind the scenes flat list, which is of course pretty much like is this sliding window optimization techniques, where it's now in this context is hold a render area and render those elements, whereas the other are kept in memory, right? So the idea here is to improve its memory use and performance. That's quite great and quite fantastic, you know, because as we look at that, and then how can we now enhance the user experience here by now adding is the delete section and the toggle, right? Using now is, for example, pressable, exactly. like this. Hey, if this is pressable, I want you to show this. If it's not, like so, right? And also is the ordering and sorting. And to me, this was quite mind-bending because, yeah, to me this is quite mind-bending because we use now is a sorting element or a sorting here. Let me actually bring this up. Let me bring this up. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? What if I say this? Mock service, interface, fundamental of front end, enterprise UI development, source control. What is this? I think is this one. There you go. This one. Yep. And React Native. All right. So the idea here is that we define this function, all right, because now we want is to sort our elements is in a descending order. In other words, what's going to show now is the more recent values at the top. Yeah, we're going to show now the more recent incomplete tasks at the top, and also the most recent completed tasks also right below at the non-completed. So you might wonder, is like, how can we do that, right? Well, this is pretty much like now a JavaScript stuff, and I have some challenge here, yeah, and I have quite challenge here to understand now the sorting mechanism, which is something that I would like to explore that. And she will help me here to understand this a little bit more.
Or actually is positive. And then this relies on something that I haven't added yet, which is the last updated timestamp. So I wanted to move to the top of the list, so newest items would be first. And the way overflowing flex cerulean color. Okay, lovely. So this was the UI, I think this was the UI in the example app. But hey, we got some extra UI elements, UI patterns that we looked at. So handling overly long text. Generally, Flex 1 is really helpful because Flex 1 means fill all the available space. So if things are overflowing, Flex 1 is usually what fixes it. All right. And then the last thing that I want to
React course. Mm. Mm.
Hello world, my name is Kent C. Dodds, and this is Get Started with React as part of Epic React.dev.
Okay. Hmm. 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 That's interesting. Anyway, okay. So, well, so because of that, right? Then, as we explore now the sorting here, which to me was quite mind-bending, as we explore the sorting here, lets me actually is listen to what she have to say, which to me is astonishingly important. All right.
To do here is we wanted to order this by last updated. So
Exactly. So that's what we're gonna do here, right? So we wanna update this by last updated here. So we're going to sort and order a list based on last updated. It's not last updated. Pretty straightforward.
what I would like to do is that if I complete something, I want this to so everything is uncompleted here. So if I complete this, I would like this to move to the bottom,
To the bottom
of the list.
of the list. Exactly.
And then if I uncomplete something, I want it
I
to
want to
move
move
to
to
the
the
top
top
of
of
the
the
list.
list.
So newest items would be first.
Mm-hmm. Newest items will be first on that completed, right?
And the way we do that is we're going to write a little sorting or like ordering function. And feel free to copy this, but this is the reason that we used our completed at timestamp.
Because we're gonna sort these kind of elements is based on this number. So in this collection, how do you get it here, man? So in these collections, all right. So so in these collections that you have, so in this collection in this collection of objects, here you have a property now that is a number, and this number is being used to sorting this from the last updated, right? So if it wants to sort that by last updated and mix that with the UI to show is, hey, this is the uncompleted and this is the completed, right? So we're gonna show is completed elements, uncompleted descending order elements, and then completed descending order elements, all right? Both of them based on their timestamp, which is
rather
great.
than a number.
Which is great, which is great. And because we are using here is a conditions to render those elements here on the flat list, right? And say, hey, if this completed, I want you to show this, and this is not as well. So the shopping list logic here is where it's going to now show those elements as it is, right? So whether it's completed or uncompleted. And if this element is completed, right? Exactly. And if this element is completed, this is quite interesting here because this is part of the logic here of the sorting elements. Okay.
So this is nothing particularly fancy, it's just a JavaScript sort function. But let's copy that and paste it into our index file. And then this relies on something that I haven't added yet, which is the last updated timestamp. So in order to order between items that you completed or uncompleted at certain parts of time,
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
you need to know when they were last updated.
Mm-hmm. Because in order to know
And then this relies on something that I haven't added yet, which is the last updated timestamp. So in order to order between items that you completed or uncompleted at certain parts of time,
in order to mm-hmm.
which is the last updated timestamp. So in order to order between items that you completed or uncompleted at certain parts of time, you need to know when they were last updated. So let's also add this last updated timestamp here. So this will be a
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. So in order to know is the mm-hmm. So you have a property that represents that. So you have a property that represents is okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have a property that represents is when you're gonna sort this kind of stuff. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this is based on a number. Mm-hmm.
arbitrary property. And then whenever we create a new item to the shopping list, or we toggle its completion state, we also update the timestamp when it was last updated. So here in handle submit,
So whenever we toggle onto something or we complete something,
let's do last updated.
we're gonna now is
last updated timestamp will be date.now. Okay. And then the same in handle toggle complete. So regardless of whether we're toggling complete or incomplete, we're just updating the last updated timestamp. So whenever we're now interacting with our shopping list, we're going to be like updating this last updated timestamp as well.
So we're gonna have this timestamp to actually have when to sort elements based on that. But this is interesting because we are sorting here is element is based on this last updated timestamp as well as the completed at timestamp. Interesting. So these two property is gonna be used for the sort functions to sort that. So if none of those are completed, that's quite interesting in this particular logic here. Representing is two. I'm using is two methods here to represent that. Jesus, French toast guy. So I'm using two methods here. I'm using two property to represent is this. Okay. Which is property from representing is data from this object. Okay. So, and then I'm gonna use now to sort them. Whether it is I sort them by last updated, but that must exist. All right. Or by complete at timestamp. This is when now this kind of data should be treated behind the scenes, right? If you receive these chunks of data, you need to do some sort of treatment so you can go and do that. Holy moly, bro. Holy moly, bro. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting here to understand this. So your sorting is that based on a number, and with this number you are sorting. Okay, with this number you are sorting this kind of elements in an ascending or descending order. So if the elements, pretty straightforward, pretty simple stuff. That's what you need to go. Okay, I know what we need to dive in, and that is sorting. I definitely need to go into that sorting. Oh my god! I definitely need to go into that, man. Sorting and searching, man. It's like sorting and searching, man. It's like absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. Mm-hmm. 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 Interesting. Mm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Don't depend necessarily on the implementation details. That is to say, you can implement certain features in life, in code, but there's bunches of different ways to actually implement them at a lower level, whether it's using arrays or, in fact, as we'll see today, other data structures as well. So while data structures are something very concrete, involving variables and pointers and functions and the like, abstract data types are a little more broadly descriptive. For instance, there are in the world these things called queues. Turns out there's things in the computer world called queues too, but in the real world, a queue.
Okay, okay. Holy moly. We get it. Okay. But in any But oh my god. Absolutely, absolutely. And cybersecurity, man. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh my god. But this, I know where my flaw is, and that is because it's the core. It's the core. Is that a structure, an algorithm? I don't know. I know. I am more quite familiar is to work with this particularly list of elements, and how you can create, how you can compose all of that. No, but I. All right. You know what? For this demo, because I recognize my flaw. Let me now is for this demo, all right, and for this series of videos is just to now be able to at least understand how this particular sorting mechanism works, and how can we now sort elements based on different conditions, right? Which is quite interesting here. And we are capable of doing this, right? We are capable of doing this kind of sorting, as you can see here, because we're about to sort them in, because if the element exists or not, we will need to actually at least have one single element that we're sure that exists, so we can sort them by that. Holy moly, bro. However, if we don't have those elements, right? If for some reason our completed doesn't have that element, this is what we're gonna do.
So let me just talk you through what this ordering function does. It's using the JavaScript array.sort method, and the way that works is that you pass in a sorting function.
What you pass is a sorting function or a compare function here.
And this gives you item A and item B. So in our case, item 1 and item 2. And you return a number which defines whether item A, or the first item, should be before the second item or no.
Exactly. Whether the second item should be first item or the second item.
So if the number you return is positive.
Exactly. So if the number you return is positive,
then item
then
1.
If the number you return is positive, then item 1 will be before item 2, right? Okay, so item 1 will be before items 2.
1 needs to be before item 2.
Exactly. Item 1 needs to be before item 2 if you pass a positive number, right?
And if it's
negative, then item 2 is, and then item 1 come after item 2.
Then item 2 should be before item 1. If it's 0, then they are both like equal. They are pretty much equal. And the reason this is actually really cool, and the reason we use timestamps, is that this number can be as big or as small as you want. So it can be minus 1,000 or plus 34, which means that we can subtract timestamps to automatically make one item like render before the other. So what we're doing here is, which means that we can subtract timestamps to automatically make one item like render before the other.
So if you take now is whatever which is great, all right, if both of them exist, because what you're doing here with this sorting element here is that, so this sort function from collections in JavaScript, where you pass in a compare function, where you have these two items here, and the idea here is that when you return is a positive value, item 2 comes before item 1. Let me see if I am right. Okay. And the n2 and the n sort, right? Let me, in fact, now coming here, because this is something that I need to put up practice, add the code, right? Like this. So it means that if you have now a collections of values here, say 1, 2, 3, no, not sorted, let's say 4, 5, 6, 1, 3, 7, 3, 7. This is quite interesting if you have now already existing numbers. Okay, so sort, it can be do this, and then we'll sort that first by converting all of this into a string by default, and then sorting in a numeric order, which is done pretty like that, pretty well. However, if you want to compare now numbers, or you want to pass now a compare function, which is this compare function, which now takes is two items, item 1 and item 2, right? If you return a positive number, right? Let's say item 1 exists and item 2 exists, all right? If both of them exist, right? If you want to sort them in a descending order, you can say, hey, I want to return now a positive number. In other words, I want to say, hey, if the item 2 minus item 1, all right, if this gives me a positive value, the item 2 is come before item 1, right? According to this set of instructions, right? According to this set of instructions. So if we now return a positive value, right? Like this, it say now item 2 comes before item 1, okay? Which is pretty much what we want to do here. This is if you want to now sorting in a this is if you want to sort it now in a descending order. So like that, we actually sorting in a descending order. If we want to sorting into an ascending order, we say, hey, if the value that you're giving to me is this, all right, which is now the difference between this value is negative. So if this value is negative, now item 1 comes before item B, item 2. And this is important to clarify that. You know, this is how you can now sort elements in an ascending or descending order. At least this is numbers, right? So as long as they are numbers, right, they're going to do that, which is quite interesting, this logic here, right? If A is less than B, by some ordering criterion, return -1, okay? You can also do something like this. There also is some sort of rules to that, right? For example, like compare this. But again, this is very specific to that. The sort method is generic. It also expects this value to have length property and integer key properties. Although string also an array like this method is not suitable for applying on them, as a string are immutable. So, but in any case, we can apply these two numbers to string, all right? So numbers works pretty well, right? But on strings, it actually works quite weird. You know, sort by value. Here what we are saying is, hey, I want you to now sort. This is a great example. This is a great example. This is a great example. All right. So I want you to now sort these items here by this value. Say here I'm gonna pass this a compare function. This is item 1 and item 2. Okay. So if I return a positive value like this, so if I return a positive value, which is item.1.value exists and item.2 value exists, okay, if I return a positive value, I want you to sort them into a descending order. In other words, the item 2 comes before item 1, right? Again, this is in this particular order. So if this is positive, all right, if this is positive, I want you to now return is that, which is return is the item 2 dot value minus item 1 dot value. So if from this operation, so if these operations now give you a positive value, it means that the second element is greater than the first one, right? So I want you to now put this second item before the first one. And if I run this, I'm going to now sort this into a in an ascending order. That's great. That's neat. That's neat. And now, if we say, hey, I want you to now sort this in a descending order, in other words, is the first value that I pass you here is greater than the second one, all right? I want you to now return is exact. So if the result of this operation, the first item is greater than the second item, and if I want to now return this into a descending order or into an ascending order, I want to return now is a negative value. So in other words, you can say is we're assuming that if the item 1 here, unfortunately it changed that, if the item 1 here minus the item 2 dot value is different, or the difference is now a negative value, so for some I want you to sort that if this difference gives you now a minus value, I want you to sort it into an ascending order, which is exactly what you're going to do here, in an ascending order. In an ascending order. But that's quite interesting here. So based on a random criterion here, so a rule of thumb for working with numbers, all right, is that, well, if you want now here, okay, if for some reason you want to now is because this is a pattern, if you want now in a descending order, if you want ascending order, yeah, if you want ascending order, you put now the second one b minus a, the second element minus the first one. This is if you want now an ascending order. Item 2 dot value minus item 1 dot value. This is if you want ascending order, right? I want now the second value to be first here. In an ascending order. Exactly. If you want now this in a descending order, you just now subtract is the item 1 to be first. They say item 2 without value as it is. And then you got now this in a descending order. That's quite interesting. This is if you want to now sort elements by number, which is most of the time what we want to do. And that's what is happening. That's what we are doing here. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So this now has this particular mechanism. So if I want to sort items here, what I'm saying here is that I want you to now sort them in an ascending order. Okay. I want you to sort them in an ascending order. If one of those items is not completed, return positive, which means is that I want you to now is return in a descending order, or in other words is now the first elements go first. Here the second elements go first. And if both of them does not exist, now I want you to is sort them by the last updated in a descending order. So if we change, for example, this to this, it will now sort this into a an ascending order. So the items, exactly, if both of them doesn't have that, so this is if we want to now sort it into the descending order or into an ascending order, from the latest to the closing one. Exactly. So if we now go to the code here, that was quite interesting, man. That was quite interesting here, by the way. On the simulator that you click here, exactly put that there. Interesting. And then you move that. Okay. Let me actually now reload this. Say, hey, the coffee is there. And then you move to that because that was the last updated. And the T now it put that down. So maybe put that here. And then it's sorting in a descending order. So now put there, and if I commit this, and there, and there. And it's going to preserve that. And so on and so forth. Okay, but this is quite the behavior that you might want to or not.
The last updated item first. If one of them isn't completed, that's pretty obvious. So if the first one is completed and the second one isn't, first one gets rendered first. If the second one is completed, first one isn't, second one gets rendered first. And otherwise, if
exactly, second one is completed.
If neither of them are completed, then we can again do our fancy subtraction to all of them correctly. So if you haven't, reload now, just to make sure that all the new... So far we've created our shopping list, but the problem is that every time we refresh our app, so if you shake your phone and refresh, or you close Go and reopen, or in my case, if I just reload this, the shopping list is empty. And that's because we are rendering our shopping list in memory in our new state. So what we really want to do is we want to persist this shopping list when we save it, so that when we close our app and reopen it, it would still be there. On the web, you might use local storage for this, and the native equivalent of this is async storage. It's a key value store, so it's an unsecured key value store for native mobile applications, and you can use it pretty much the same as local storage. The only difference is, well, the clue's in the name, it's asynchronous, so all the calls to async storage are asynchronous. So let's install async storage. So we'll do npx expo install React Native async storage, and actually, here's a fun thing about async storage. So this actually used to be part of the core React Native package, but it's an example of how the React team at Meta really wanted to draw the line between what the community should handle and what the core. We refresh our app. So if you shake your phone and refresh, or you close Go and reopen, or in my case, if I just reload this, the shopping list is empty. And that's because we are rendering our shopping list in memory in our new state. So what we really want to do is we want to persist this shopping list when we save it, so that when we close our app.
Data persistence. So okay, that was quite interesting. And that was also quite mind-bending. I definitely must admit it. And that was quite my bending, by the way. And data persistent. Persistent.
App and reopen it, it would still be there. On the web, you might use local storage for this, and the native equivalent of this is async storage. It's a key value store, so it's an unsecured key value store for native mobile applications, and you can use it pretty much the same as local storage. The only difference is, well, the clue's in the name. It's asynchronous, so all the calls to async storage are asynchronous. So let's install async storage.
That's interesting. This is now async storage in React Native. But this is a component remove on use of the community package instead. Async storage is an encrypted, asynchronous, persisting key value storage system that is global to the app. It should be used instead of a local storage. It is recommended that you use an abstraction on top of async storage for that. But now this is interesting because this was removed. Interesting. React Native async storage. Remove. Use one of the community packages instead. Async storage. This is one of the community package. React Native async storage. Oh, there you got it. Async storage, data store system for React Native. Okay, persistent storage is a synchronous, unencrypted, persistent key value store solution for your React Native, multi-platform and simple API. You might want to or not use that. Unencrypted persistent data structure. Interesting. Okay. You might go or no without it. Exactly, React Native async storage here. Okay, it's an unencrypted, it's an asynchronous, unencrypted, persisting key value store. It's an unencrypted, it's an asynchronous, it's an asynchronous, unencrypted, persistent key value store. Key value store storage solution. Interesting. It's like Redis without encryption. So async storage. Interesting. It's an asynchronous, unencrypted, persisting key value storage solution. Okay, that's mind blowing.
We'll do npx expo install React Native async storage, and actually, here's a fun thing about async storage. So this actually used to be part of the core React Native package, but it's an example of how the React team at Meta really wanted to draw the line between what the community should handle and what the core React Native package should handle. So this is actually a great example of something that used to be part of React Native core, and it was explicitly moved out and turned into a community library, so it could be built, developed, and managed independently of the core React Native.
Okay, so this was part of the React Native core and indicate what the meta team wants to do for the community as a way to delegate part of that
package core, and it was explicitly moved out and turned into a community
as a way to move out and turn it into a community library. That makes a ton of sense.
library, so it could be built, developed, and managed.
So it can be built, developed, and managed by the community, independently of the React Native, independently of the React Native core team.
Independently of the core React Native package. So let's create a utils folder. So new folder, utils, and let's call a function called storage.ts. So we'll put our async storage kind of utility functions there. And the two things you want to do with async storage is you want to get and you want to set. So let's do an export async function. Get from storage.
Okay. A normal
And
async
this will
Java
need
function.
a key.
Also
which is a string.
useful because
So this will be the key for your async storage on your device, and it will be scoped to the application you're using. So one application can't access things from another application's async storage unless you jailbreak your device, and then all kind of things can happen. Application you're using. So one application can't access things from another application's async storage unless you jailbreak your device.
Unless you jailbreak your device. Okay, until you jailbreak your device.
All kind of things can happen, but generally they're scoped to the application that you're using. So what we want to do is we'll do const data, and this will be an asynchronous function, so await async storage.
Async storage.
So this is the default export from the async storage package, and we'll do get item
Similar like
with the
that.
key. And everything in async storage is a string. So we're going to save a JavaScript object.
Yeah, because this is a
and so a JSON object. So we will pass it. So
JSON string, JSON parse.
actually the best way to do this is usually if you're passing anything, you want to wrap it into a try catch. So let's do a try and a catch
So is there any error?
over this, and then default to returning null. Whenever you JSON parse everything, make sure you do a try catch in React Native, because otherwise things might crash if the thing that you're passing is not a valid JSON object. So we want to return if there is data, so it's not the initial time, we'll do JSON
parse
data. And otherwise let's return a null. And I probably should have done save from storage first, but let's do an export async function save to storage. And here we need to do a key, again. So this is the key, the string
and the
address of
value
where we're saving to, and then our data. Let's just
because they're already using this key value pair here. Because we are now interacting with this storage, we need to be wait for that this input and output device.
And await async storage set item And we'll have two properties. So the first one will be the key, so the address of where you're saving it to. And the second one will be what you're saving. So this has to be a string. So we call it JSON stringify
Exactly.
on this data
Because we wanted to transform that into a string for that.
object.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I said I probably should have done the save to storage first is actually the way that you get your item depends on what you're saving. So in this case, I'm saying that I'm always going to be saving an object, and that's why I'm calling JSON.stringify on it. And then therefore, when we get the item, we can call JSON pass on it. But you could set just like any value here. So it could just be a string. So as long as it's a string, it can be anything. And one thing to note is because you can only store strings here, then everything that you store in async storage has to be serializable. So you can't have date objects, for example. Alright, so now it's time to use it. So let's create our storage key in our index screen. So let's do const storage key. And this can be anything. I'm just going to call it shopping list. But this will be unique, so whenever you go to async storage on this app using this key, you will get that data. And we're going to use a use effect. So use effect is a React hook, and using it like this, so we're going to pass in just an arrow function and an empty array. So 2 arguments, an arrow function and an empty array. And then what this does is that it lets you execute a thing once when the component is loaded. So in this case, it's very common to use this to fetch some initial data. One thing about use effects is that they are synchronous, so you can't do anything asynchronous in them. So as you might have recalled, our async storage is asynchronous. So how do you execute an asynchronous function from a synchronous use effect? And the really common workaround for this is that you define your asynchronous function inside your use effect. So I'm going to do it's a string, it can be anything. Using this key, you will get that data. And we're going to use a use effect. So use effect is a React hook, and using it like
that
this,
allows
so
us to synchronize with external
devices
or external APIs, right? In our case, the
array. So 2 arguments, an arrow function, and an empty array. And then what this does
or anytime
is that it lets you execute a thing once when the component is loaded. So in this case, it's very common to use this to fetch some initial data. One thing about use effects is that they are synchronous, so you can't do anything asynchronous in them. So as you might have recalled, our async storage is asynchronous. So how do you execute an asynchronous function from a synchronous use effect? And the really common workaround for this is that you define your asynchronous function inside your use effect. So I'm going to do const fetch initial, and this will be an asynchronous array function. And it's going to do const data, so this will be await get from storage.
Because all of this effect happens synchronous, and a way to define this asynchronous task is by defining the asynchronous function.
So if data, we will set shopping list data. So yeah, so this will be an array of items. So I know I call this an object, but an array is an object in JavaScript. Right, okay, so the way we call it is we literally just call fetch initial here immediately underneath it. So this is, we could have defined this like somewhere else, but this is like the way that you would execute an asynchronous function inside a use effect. So we're not waiting, so we can't do a wait. So this will tell us that this is asynchronous, and if we try to make this asynchronous, it would fail. so we're just fire and forgetting it. And the last thing we need to do is we need to sync all of our updates. So whenever we are creating a new item or we are toggling the completion of an item, we also update our async storage. So here in handle submit, where we're setting our shopping list, let's also do save to storage, and we have our key and our shopping list. Did I call this our storage key? Key and our shopping list. Did I call this our storage key? And when we're deleting it, we're doing the same. So we're doing save to storage, storage key, and shopping list. And same for handle toggle complete. So save to storage, key, storage key, and the new shopping list. Lovely. So now when I do coffee,
And now you're storing that persistently. You're storing that in not in memory, but you're storing that is on disk.
sugar, mark one of them as complete. So now, hopefully, if I reload my app, all of them are still here and my status persisted. So that's how you use async storage in React Native to persist data across app launches.
That's quite interesting.
Async storage.
That's quite interesting. That's very, very interesting. Let's get into this. Absolutely. So we're going to create now our own here is async storage. Okay. We define a util function here where we say, hey, this will be called now the storage as a TypeScript, right? And inside of the storage, I want to now export two functions, the save method and the get method. Both of them will be async functions. The first we'll call is get from storage, where we're gonna get this as a key, that is a string, and because here we're gonna use is the async storage, which is a unencrypted, persistent, asynchronous, so asynchronous, unencrypted, persistent key value store, pretty much like local storage, which is good. And then get that value, get item, and here we pass this the key, right? So I want you to now wait for this, and by the time you get that, well, store that into a data identifier, because this is an asynchronous function, and if something goes wrong, we would like to wrap that into a try catch, which is the way how in JavaScript we synchronous handle with errors. And because now we are in an async and await context function execution, it will now, if there any error, right, it will actually now catch that. But in our case, we don't want to catch that, we just want to return now null. However, if that is done, so if you fire up this promise, and once you get this data, then you have now received is the value here. So pretty much like generators is working behind the scenes. But again, this is once you say, hey, all right, since the way we store our data here, it was as a JSON, all right, we would like is to actually decode that into a JSON. Why is that? Because again, this storage actually stores stuff in this key value pair. The value is on a string, so we need to actually is parse that string. And the way to parse that string and to convert it into a JSON object is by using JSON.parse, right? And here we say, all right, if the data exists, so this is what you're going to return, right? Or you can say something like this: return if the data exists, this, otherwise null. Pretty much like that. Yeah, here we're not using error, so we're not showing anything here. And another function is to save that, which is export async function save to storage, right? Here we're going to store this as the key and the value, all right? That'll be an object, right? And we want this to now save this value. And first, if we're going to save that value, we get now the set item, where here we're going to pass is the key and the string that must be a value. So this is when we say, hey, whatever value that you are passing here, I want you to stringify this, right? And I want you to await for that, right? So by the time that is done, well, this is good. If you want to try and catch errors, say try and catch, like that. You can do something like this. Perhaps it's returning is something out of that.
All right, so now.
Otherwise, well, you return is perhaps you return null, or in this case, we're not going to handle is the error, right? But we must, right? But we must. Similar to this, and then you got it. So now on this storage file that I'm describing is what we're gonna do with this stuff. Then I want you to now make use of that. So by the time we get into this component and load this data, right? Well, I want you to, instead of doing this initial list, I want to render now initially an empty collection, right? And this is when we're going to use now a use effect as a way to synchronize with external systems. In other words, to synchronize with external systems, such as or a server reading the data from the server, or DOM APIs, or in our case, the async storage. So here's when we define our use effect, and the use effect is, as I mentioned before, but unlike here, I am defining is this to indicate that, hey, I want you to run only once, right? And since effects are synchronous, right? One workaround to run this async nature or async function is to say, hey, run that function for me. So define the function, define an async function, and then run that function for me. In other words, we say, hey, get how do we define this? Get from storage. Say get from storage, and then you want to pass the key value here. We can define some sort of cons here, right? Like this, right?
So 2 arguments, an arrow function, and an empty array. And then what this does is that it lets you execute a thing once when the effect is synchronous. So how do you execute an asynchronous function from a synchronous and it's
Yeah, the
gonna-
workaround of that is to actually define is the shopping key.
So yeah, so this will be
So storage key, exactly. This is the, you can say storage key. You can also define it under the util here. So utils.ts here is a way to now create all of this. Right? And then you say, hey, export this. So import this. Oh, because yeah, we haven't exported this. Say export type, and now you can actually shopping list item type. We import that, right? Like so. We can wrap this into a util. This is generate random numbers. So generate random numbers, or generate 20 elements for scroll view. Testing, all right, that'll be good. And then the storage key, which is in our case, we're gonna call this shopping list, right? And this key is what we're gonna use now for that. We say, hey, get from storage of the storage key, because this is now an async function. Okay, I want to wait for this, which means is that I need to wrap this into a function, into an async function, right? Let me put this now, the initial render, or fetch initial. It's a fetch initial, right? So careful. Fetch initial, right? So by the time that now this is done, like this, again we're assuming is the happy path. I want you to now set that data. You know, it's like say, hey, set this data. Set shopping list data, exactly. Say data here, where you get from storage to storage key. So we say, hey, so if we're going to store this into a data identifier variable here. So if the data exists, okay, so if for some reason we get the data there, then I want you to now set the state, set the shopping list with the data, right? And then now call that async function, fetch initial here, right? Now, I also wanted to now add the items when we submit that, or when we toggle that, all right? So let's get into this. So when we handle here, we say, hey, I want to set shopping and also set or save to storage the key value, the storage key, followed by the new shopping list. And also I want to store that after we now toggle between elements, which is save to storage, and using the storage key followed by the new shopping list. All right, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And this now is supposed to work. So if we go here, we don't have any elements, that's right. And then we say coffee and milk and tea. And if we reload this, we got them. That'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.